strike by workers in transport sectors in Athens, but also throughout other cities in Greece as well. So again, you see the speed with which something that was a student issue and a youth issue, the shooting of a 15-year-old, actually became a general strike in Athens. So we already have some of the ingredients here. It's maybe a little premature to think about a general strike, but you have the transport strike in Ottawa, you have the strike here in York, you have University of Toronto students who've just voted to allow a strike for TAs and graduate assistants and so on. So this is going to become a lot more common in the coming years, given what's happened. We've lived through, in the last 20 years perhaps, a time of extraordinary quiescence politically by people who have been repressed by the system. But that's not going to continue. We know that's not going to continue, given precisely the kinds of attacks that are beginning to come down in the wake of economic crisis. So the response to the economic crisis, I like to think of it in terms of the three R's, R-E, the three R's. One I've already mentioned, that's repression. And we should be ready for some of that to happen. It may have a softer side or it may have a harder side, but the repression is going to be there. The other thing that's likely to happen is reform, the second of the R's, if you like. And the reform is likely to come in a lot of ways. It's going to come from the kind of left liberals. It's going to come from some social democrats in Europe, for example, who think that the way out of this crisis is what in the States would be called a New Deal. The economic crisis that's going on right now globally is a crisis of capitalism. It's not just a financial crisis, it's not just a crisis of the economic sphere, it's a capitalist crisis. It's a crisis of the very guts of how we put the society together. It's a crisis of socially how we put that society together. And that's exactly what this kind of strike and the kinds of events, the general strike in Greece, the takeover of the factory in Chicago, that's exactly what is being put on the agenda by those kinds of events. States that somehow Barack Obama is going to solve a lot of these problems, that he's the answer. Now, you cannot underestimate how important it is that the leader of the United States now is actually a black man. I don't want to call him African American because he's a lot more than that. He's African, he's American, he's Indonesian, he's many ethnic racial mixes. So he's not technically African American. But the point of a black man being in the presidency cannot be underestimated. And what that does to the sort of political psyche, not just of the United States, but to the world, it seems to me is tremendously important. But we shouldn't be unrealistic. And we shouldn't think that somehow Barack Obama is going to be the socialist that the Republicans, out of utter desperation to try and prevent him being elected, believed that he was. Barack Obama is not a socialist. He's probably not even a really left liberal, if you want to be honest about it. And while it seems that he will embark on certain kinds of reforms, the second of the R's I wanted to talk about, I really honestly think that if you look at the people that he's put in the cabinet already, the chances of there being any kind of major reform that's going to help working class people dramatically is already gone. And I hate to be so pessimistic about it, especially at the same time when I think it's important that Obama did get elected. But I think we shouldn't have any false expectations about what Obama is likely to do, not just in the United States, but given the role of the presidency of the United States, given what he's likely to do in a more global kind of sense. He's already backtracking and bringing troops out of Iraq. And I think that's very clear in the kind of statements that he's been making. So, reform. Reform is not enough. The kind of ideas of a new deal, it seems to me, are totally unambitious in a moment when crisis is going to be dramatically difficult for a lot of people. Of the re's, we've done what, reform, repression. The third of them, of course, is resistance, and that's the tremendous part. It's actually impossible to predict how the response to this larger economic crisis is going to come out. You can read all of the Marxist analysis, which I do, that you like, but it won't give you a prediction. You can read all of the political analysis, the political theory, you can read all of the social science theory. It will not give you a good sense of how this is going to resolve and how the public sector, which is now under major attack, is going to emerge from the present crisis. It's just impossible to predict. It's impossible to predict because we don't know, on the one hand, how the state, whether we're talking about the global, the national, the local kind of state, is going to respond, but we don't know the kinds of resistance that are going to be created. And the resistance is the key. We will be able to have a part in creating what the future looks like, to the point, to the extent that we're involved in creating a resistance against the ways in which the old repressive regimes and even the reformist solutions attempt to put their will on the solution to the question. And very difficult to do. And you all know, because you're here, exactly what you're giving up by being here. You also know what you're fighting for. And I'd like to just tell you a story, which I told to Tricia Wood right beforehand. One of the earlier picket lines I was ever on was for nurses in Ohio in 1977 or 78, I think it was. It came right after the miners' strike in West Virginia and throughout the United States. You learn more on a picket line than you will ever learn if you spend an entire year without sleep in the library. Why do you learn it? Because you're putting yourself in the line. You're really putting yourself in the line. You're putting your body and your brain right in the firing line when you're on a picket line. You learn more. These nurses, many of them African American women, were on strike for better work conditions, better pay, and better control over their own jobs as nurses, right? Now, in that process of politicization, they had actually gone down to West Virginia to support miners the year earlier in an Appalachian mining community and made some friends there. And the really interesting thing happened when the miners then came back to the picket line for the nurses in Ohio. When these mainly African American nurses had gone down to sort of white Appalachian miner country in West Virginia, the miners had been astonished that these women would come to support them. Totally astonished. And they learned something from those women being there. But more importantly, the next year, when in Ashtabula, the nurses were on strike, the miners came up from Appalachia, and they came up with some working class, some racist ideas to Ohio, but they recognized that these women had come down and supported them and put themselves on the line, literally. So in a period of about 3 days, you could see these women literally took apart and reconstructed for these white miners down in Appalachia their whole image of race. They basically gave them an education for 3 days on anti-racism on the picket line. And it was an extraordinary thing to see. And it's not something you go learn about in libraries. And that's the importance of picket lines. It's not just what you do and what you stop and what you create. It's what you create mentally and intellectually and politically as well. And you have discussions, and you have connections with people that you never ever lose for the rest of your life. So let me just end by saying Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, whom some of you will know as a theorist from a socialist and communist in early the 20s in Italy, once said, "You can only predict the future to the extent that you're involved in making it happen." And it seems to me that's exactly right. The intellectual comes together with the practical, and that's exactly what a picket line is all about. You can only predict the future to the extent that you're involved in making it happen. You guys, together, and with the connections to people at University of Toronto or in Ottawa or Greece or Chicago, are involved in making that future happen, and that's tremendous. Yes to the strike. Yes to the strike. Yes to the strike.